Welcome back, everybody. Today we have a very special guest. Her name is Kathryn Burmeister, and she is so many things. A lawyer, a business owner. She opened her own law practice. She's an advocate for human and animal rights, and also a speaker and an author. So we have a ton to dive into today, and I'm really excited to get started. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, I kind of want to get right into it, talking a little bit about really the topic of your book. I found that to be really interesting, overcoming the addiction to the status quo. And I'm curious, what does the status quo mean to you, or what is the definition of that?
Yeah, so it's funny when I do speaking engagements and I speak on this, I actually ask people like what it means to them. But my definition is the same thing that applies to everybody. It's internal and external expectations that we put on ourselves or others put on us. So it's this idea that we have to be a certain way, or we're not enough if we don't do X, Y, and Z, or we shouldn't be doing this. The shoulds are usually come up in people's thinking. That's negative self-talk, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, that's really what it is expectations. And, some of it's based on societal norms, but really what it comes down to is this pressure we put on ourselves at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I can only imagine, you talk about it being addiction, and that must, when I think about the people that I've met in my life, the number of them that are addicted to that is probably pretty high, if not everybody, right?
Yeah, pretty much. So, and when I use the word addiction, I don't use it flippantly. I genuinely believe it is an addiction. And again, this is not like a comparison for who has the worst addiction, but I feel like it's something that's really existential. So it's even all the
Mhm.
more difficult to define what it is, how does it impact people. And there's no support group for addiction to the status quo, but it will so frequently lead people to be self-destructive. And
Mhm.
often what happens, right, is you're not just self-destructive, you're destroying things around you as well. So whether it's stealing money, whether it's, becoming an alcoholic, like there's a lot of things that people do to feed this addiction to the status quo or to cope with them trying to feed the
Mhm.
addiction to the status quo. So that's really the
Yeah.
biggest problem with it. And I think people like to think that they can handle everything and, they keep kicking the can down the road. I'll deal with it whenever, or they just don't even believe there's a can that exists, right? But it turns out, and for me, this was the case. Your can is eventually going to catch up with you, for lack of a better example. But it's you can't ignore it. Your body is ultimately going to hold you accountable, and that's what happened with me in my case.
Yeah, if you're comfortable, I guess, what was your personal experience with kind of the can getting bigger and you couldn't kick it anymore?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for following that through. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, what ultimately happened was I've always been an overachiever since I was young. I've dealt with anxiety and depression since about high school. And while my anxiety and depression was managed really well, it doesn't just go away for anybody who's dealt with anything like that. So it's more of a maintenance thing. And if you're proactive about it, you can keep it in check. So I graduated law school, I got my dream job, and I was working for a law firm for about a year and a half. And it was myself, two other associates that were a little bit older than me, but close in age, and then our partner, our founding partner, who had been doing this for 30 years. He had the respect of so many of his, colleagues. He was a great guy. Would give you the shirt off of his back. He really let us learn by actually practicing law, whereas so many people will just kind of keep you under their thumb. And then he taught us the right way. So one morning, about a year and a half after I started, I got a call from the senior associate, and he said we all need to come in. The attorneys need to come in early. So I got there, and in my mind, because of just how much ridiculous pressure I've always put on myself, I was like, I must have done something wrong. Like I'm the new person on the block, like completely unfounded, right? But that's where my mind went. So we come in and find out that our founding partner had committed suicide. He had been stealing from clients for 8 years. Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
He left notes. He left notes to us. He left notes to State Bar, his family. He had daughters, grandbabies. And he
Oh,
said, literally, if it's between going to prison or this is what I'm choosing. Um,
wow.
Needless to say, it was a lot. Aside from the obvious part of it, the fallout from that was astronomical. So of course we went to the state
Mhm.
bar, let them know what we knew, but we didn't. None of us had access to the bank account, so there was no way for any
Mhm.
of us to have known that. Who's going to question somebody who's been practicing for 30 years? Compared to people that are like, you know, late 20s, early
Fresh
30s
out.
type thing. Yeah.
Mhm.
So the senior associate at that time, myself, and one paralegal decided to try and continue the law firm. And there was a lot aside from, just running the firm. There were the old clients, what was going to happen, in terms of money, keeping 70 cases, which is a lot for a litigation firm, going. And my now new partner, so the former senior associate, he basically checked out mentally and physically.
Yeah.
So I was running the firm and I was carrying everybody's emotional baggage, including my own. And then I was also dealing with, the cases day to day. So I had never run a practice before, obviously. I was still like what I call a baby lawyer. And I was operating on adrenaline. And of course, I didn't know it at the time. I just kept moving forward. Um, but ultimately, it caught up with me. So I was halfway around the world, actually in Portugal on a trip, and I get a call from my paralegal, and she needed permission to spend some money on something that was urgent, like we would malpractice if we didn't do it. I said, okay,
Mhm.
why are you calling me? I appreciate you and that you're doing this, but why are you calling me when I'm halfway around the world? She said, I can't get a hold of our partner. And he knew I was going to be out of the country. Like, he totally should be able to handle this. So I said, yes, of course, do what you need to do. And I get back in town. My partner's not there. He's at a retreat, a silent retreat. Can't reach him, nothing. And finally, it all just came to me just how much had happened, how much was going on, how
Yeah.
unhappy I was, how hard I'd been working, truly hoping and believing that this was going to be enough to meet the expectations of clients, myself, everything. And I left work early and I was having suicidal ideations. And I knew
Mhm.
enough because I'd maintained my mental health enough that I needed to call my husband. So I had him come meet me home at home from work. And so he was able to help me through that. But the next day I woke up and it was literally as if a switch had been flipped. That's the best way to describe it. It's a lot. It's one thing to know what you need to do for yourself and know that you need to set boundaries, right? Or that you need to take more time for yourself. But it is completely different to actually implement that and make it happen. And the next day, that's what I was able to do. It was very clear to me that I was
Mhm.
not going to tolerate how people were treating me, that I wasn't going to keep doing this if it didn't make me happy, that I didn't care what people thought anymore. And in
Mhm.
a way, I would never wish it on my worst enemy, of course, but it's the best thing that's ever happened to me. And so that's my
Mhm.
goal with this book is to really, I could have written a book that was John Grisham meets Jerry Springer, and would do well because it was just that insane. Like day to day, things were changing, it's becoming more and more dramatic. But
Yeah.
I didn't want it to be that. Like I didn't want the tragedy and that fallout to be what the book was about. I wanted to show people that you can be who you are. And I think a lot of lawyers in particular are very A type. Um, go
Mhm.
into this profession, have this experience, learn from a tragic event, and then how I came out the other side. So
Mhm.
that was my goal with the book. And even though I'm a lawyer and I have that background, everybody's addicted to the status quo in some capacity or another. It's just a matter of how much,
Mhm.
and in what areas of your life, if not all of it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. So many things are coming up as you were speaking for me. I mean, and the first kind of being, I think, when you were talking about you're kind of carrying all of these people and really stepping up in those moments. And I think so often we lose sight of the fact that a lot of leaders and a lot of people that are kind of like out there being kind of the front person or front woman and they struggle just as much as someone who might be just as openly upset or sad or going through things and just kind of being able to acknowledge that more so I think is really important.
Yeah, and
um
I think it's yeah, people step into that role, right, as a leader or just in a time of crisis, unintentional leader, right? But you're
mhm,
absolutely right. It's not a sign of struggle if somebody's not falling apart. Yeah,
Mhm.
it's tough. And I think it is. I mean, in all fairness, why would you're going to look to the person that's making the most noise, for lack of a better phrase, as compared to the person who's quieter about it.
Yeah.
But that's all the more reason why each of us as individuals has to be in tune with ourselves enough to know, okay, this is where my limit is. Here's where I'm not going to go. Because people aren't going to do it for you. And that's the biggest thing I always say is I don't care how much your family loves you. They're never going to be able to sit there and say, hey, you should take more time off work, right? Or you should go and focus on self-care, because they just, one, they may say it, but two, they can't do it for you at the end of the day. You've got to be the one that actually does it.
Totally. Yeah. So for you, I guess you talked about, you kind of reach that breaking point. And I think the goal is to never have to reach that breaking point. But so often it seems like, and I've had a similar experience too, but like, and that ends up being the best thing that's ever happened to you. But it's like, how can we help people not have to go to that point? And if you do, wherever you are, I guess, how did you set those boundaries and learn how to really start taking care of yourself and like tuning in more and listening?
Yeah, I think yeah, I mean, it's the same whether you actually get to that point or whether you're recovering from hitting that point. So, first and foremost, with people that I coach too, is knowing who you are. You have to be in tune with who you are. And if it's you want to change, that's totally fine. But you need to know where you are, where you want to be if you want to change, and then what things you need to work on. Is it imposter syndrome? Is it setting boundaries? There are a number of things that I go over with my clients and kind of drill down to, okay, what are the top three that we want to address? Um, because if you don't know yourself, you're not going to be able to start setting boundaries and parameters for yourself in life, because you've been operating in a willy-nilly fashion, and you've just been letting kind of everything happen the way it
Mhm.
happens, or you've just been operating on, habit for so long. So I think of people as like little human startups. So when you have a business, you have mission, vision, and values that really help guide you, your business, and how you operate and what decisions you make. So for people doing the same thing is just as valuable. If you're not used to
Mhm.
setting boundaries and making healthy decisions or decisions that are in line with where you want to be, you set up these parameters. And then from there, you can make decisions. And it's really easy to make them when you know where the lines are. It's like, okay, I'm going to stay within the lines and just keep going forward. And that's what really
Mhm.
helps people start to change the patterns that they've been operating under for so long, because it's not going to happen overnight. It's not easy. I'll be the first one to say it,
Yeah.
but it's so
Yeah.
incredibly worth it.
Oh, definitely. And in terms of setting boundaries, because I think, you're so right in terms of understanding like where they are and then living within them. And this is something I've personally been working on for probably like the past year or so. And for me, it's like I recognize what they are. And then for a while, I wasn't able to actually like live within them, but I would just know, oh, this is outside of my boundary. And it took me a while to actually be able to like voice that. So I don't know if like working with your clients or in coaching people, how do you help them be able to not only know what they are, but then also execute on those?
Yeah, it's baby steps. You cannot expect it to happen overnight. I mean, think about it. You've probably operated for how many years, in this unhealthy way. Proverbial you has
Oh, yeah.
operated for so many years, right? So you set those boundaries, and then, like you just said, that's one of the healthiest things you can start doing is identifying them, sitting with those thoughts when that negative self talk kicks in, being like, oh, that's not really what's happening right now, right? That's just my perception of it and what my internal voice is
Mhm.
telling me. So identifying is the first thing, and then really starting to gradually work within those boundaries is what you have to do. But it takes practice. I mean, that's why when I talk about mental health or even this, I'm in the happiest point I am in my life, because it's just an existence. It's not like I've checked off a box to be happy, right? But it's an ongoing process. It's not something that's one and done. So that was one of my
Mhm.
biggest hurdles as what I call a recovering box checker is you can't do five things and be happy forever. That's just not how that works.
Yeah.
But you can live a life that is based on happiness, and it's fulfilling, and it allows you to encounter adversity and challenges in a healthy way.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean everything's going to be rainbows and kittens, but what it does mean is that you have a better approach to life. And so, therefore, when things do come up, they come up in a way that allow you to learn from them instead of be traumatized from them.
Oh, wow. Yeah, very, very good point. So I guess when we talk about the status quo, I think that it's pretty clear as to why this is a problem, but is there anything specific that you've identified that kind of this causes like a domino effect of all of these other things that start happening because we're stuck in these ways and we can't break free from them?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things, especially in our society, Western culture predominantly, is we get into these jobs where we're just miserable. And if we're not miserable, we've convinced ourselves to be happy, right? And then it ultimately catches up with us. And we think, oh, okay, well, I'll just pay my dues now. I'll, take
Mhm.
fill in the blank, crap from somebody or my coworker, or my boss, and it'll get better. Like I'll just work really hard and it'll get better. um, and that may happen. I'm not saying it doesn't, but what does happen in that time is you spent so much time and energy trying to live something that you don't want to live. And again, it's not as though everything's going to be perfect, but you don't have to convince yourself to live a life that really isn't going to be fulfilling at the end. Not only one, does money in and of itself not make people happy, but two, you could, and not to be morbid, you could die tomorrow in a car wreck or fill in the blank of
Mhm.
whatever. You've lived your
Mhm.
entire life on 20 years from now. What are you doing now? Are you happy now? You don't have to put that off. So
Mhm.
that's one of the biggest tragedies, quite frankly, that I really see is people living their life based on what's going to happen 20 years from now or where they expect to be in 20 years and not living now. And as a result, they're
Yeah.
just not happy. Um, and money, when I say talk about money not being, making people happy in and of itself, clearly there's a threshold for meeting the basic needs, right? But
Mhm.
there have been studies that have been done that show after a certain point, happiness decreases with the level of money that you have. And I,
More
as an
money, more
example,
problems.
exactly, exactly. Somebody sang about that too. But I mean, as an example, I'm in my folks' cabin up in Blue Ridge Mountains in Georgia right now. And yes, money to my parents have allowed us to do this, and it's a great experience, but that's what it is. It's the experience that comes from it. It's not in and of itself having money sitting in a bank account or owning a cabin. It's the experiences that you
Mhm.
have with those objects that are meaningful at the end of the day. And I think that's what we have to get away from. We are always projecting down the road to have, the kids that are in the Ivy League school or the fancy car. It's like, yeah, great. If that happens, it happens. But what about right now? What makes me happy right
Mhm.
this minute? And I think a lot of people can't identify that, which is really sad, really, really sad to me.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. I think, talking about money, it's like there are some of the happiest people that are super wealthy, and then some of the happiest people that have nothing, and vice versa. There are very unhappy wealthy people and very unhappy poor people. And there's not necessarily a confirmed like correlation between the two. I think it's more of like who you are and what you choose to value.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
yeah.
There's I think Solving for Happiness is the name of the book, and forgive me, I don't remember the author, but he did, I think, investment work, but he was in Dubai, and he was living there with his family and was constantly busy. But he had like two yachts, astronomical amount of money, and his son went in for, I think it was pretty routine surgery. 17 years old or so, ended up dying on the surgery table, and it
Mm-hmm.
completely changed his perspective on what was important in life. I mean, he cared about his kids and loved his family, but he was spending so much time and effort on everything else but that he really
Mm-hmm.
realized, okay, if I had X amount of days left, what would I want to do? Nobody's going to say, I want to go sit with my money in my bank. Okay. Nobody's going to say, I want to go like just sit and stare at my Maserati,
Just
right?
gonna take a shower and dollar
Right,
bills.
right, exactly. You're going to want to spend time with the people that mean the most to you, and, fostering the relationships that you care about. And that's what I tell people. Okay, yeah, it's hard. Yeah, this takes a long time. But the alternative is so much worse. You get to the end of your life, whenever that may be, and you look back and say, wow, I really wish I had put time and effort into enjoying myself and enjoying the
Mhm.
relationships I've created. Nobody's ever going to be on their deathbed going, I really should have saved more money, or I really should have spent more money, or if anything with regards to that. So I
Yeah.
think that's the
Yeah.
alternative. You really have to look at as a comparison.
So, I guess in terms of how can people indicate like they're living their life, maybe they like their job some days, not other days, but they find themselves just like living for the weekend or whatever, having those like Sunday scaries kind of feelings. But what are indicators that someone might be living in this like status quo kind of living?
Yeah. So one of the biggest things I've identified, even in my own personal injury practice as a lawyer, I first of all, let me say I love practicing law. As I've progressed through running the business, there are things outside of my control that are just part of the business and the practice area that have really started to suck the energy out of me. Um, and as a result, I have really sat with the idea of, okay, what does it look like if I pull back in my practice and push forward on coaching and speaking and writing? And that's what I'm doing.
Mhm.
So even something that you
Mhm.
think initially or was initially so fulfilling, which was running my practice, has shifted. So one, being open to the fact that things can change, because a lot of what we do is in gray, not black and white. But also recognize, like, okay, something that was making me happy generally isn't now. My health is suffering. I'm not spending time or not able to spend time on the relationships that matter to me. Those are the biggest things. So checking in with your, again, you have to know yourself. You've got to check in with yourself to say, okay, this is baseline. How are things different, or are they not different? um, but being in tune with that is really the best way to start identifying, okay, things are changing, or they're not what they used to be, or they're just not what they've ever been. And then having the courage
Mhm.
to step out of that, which is scary. I'll be the first one to say it's scary as hell to
Oh, yeah.
change your life, even if it's for the better. But again, you've always got to think about that alternative to not doing it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess i- if you have never, you're talking about checking in with yourself, I think that it's pretty common for people to never do that. And I don't know if anyone listening like necessarily would if they're listening to this, but do you have a specific way that you coach people or tell people really how to actually make that a practice?
Yeah, it's easy for me because I've done it for so long, and I've really just kind of always been a an intellectual person in terms of being only child, had a lot of time to think, that type of thing. But it is really difficult, because it's uncomfortable. That's why, really, at the end of the day,
Mhm.
um, sitting, meditating, really, is what it is just meditating and letting all of your other conscious thoughts go away. And that's hard. That is super hard to do when your mind's going a million miles a minute, and you're so used to operating that way. But really quieting your thoughts so you can hear your internal dialogue. And often, your internal dialogue will either be your own voice, which is, for me, that's what it is, or for other people,
Mhm.
it'll be um, a figure in their life that's had an impact on them, say a family member, like a parent, but really listening to what it's telling you. And your internal voice is, if you're especially doing this exercise for the first time, not usually positive. So really listening to what it's telling you and saying, okay, why is it telling me this? And I think we take it for granted that that's a given. Whatever we're hearing is true, and that's just not the
Mhm.
case. Um, but really
Mhm.
having to get quiet and listen to what your internal dialogue is the first step, and then being able to parse out, okay, this is true, which 99.9% of the time it's not, especially at this stage of trying to do this. Um, this is just an exaggeration of the facts, or creating them out of nowhere. Um, and really identifying what this means. Okay, so why is my brain doing this to me? Why is it telling me this message, and getting to the root of it? But it takes time, effort, and practice to get confident and get to a point where you're used to doing that.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's probably one of those things too of like you're almost lying to yourself, convincing yourself, like, I like this job. I like this community. I like what I'm doing every day. And you're like, I can do this. And you don't want to hear that voice in the back of your head that's like, excuse me, this isn't our vibe. This isn't what we want to be
Yeah,
doing. And so like removing all of that in order to hear what's actually happening, I think we kind of condition ourselves to do the inverse of that.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, frequently I was telling myself for so long as like I said, my own voice, you're not enough if you don't keep pushing through the situation and ride it out until, whatever
Mhm.
happens, until it's resolved.
Mhm.
You
Right.
should be working harder, even though I was already working an insane amount. You
Yeah.
should be able to keep the clients from being upset, uh, by doing fill in the blank. So all these thoughts were not realistic, first of all. Second of all, they didn't have any evidence to support them, right? And that's another thing I think, whenever I went through a phase where I felt like, you know, I'm, I'm not worthy of running my own practice because I was so young. Was there any evidence to support that out there? And that seems like a very lawyerly term, but I just mean, is there any facts out
Oh
there
yeah.
that substantiates it, right? There's not. 99% of the time, there aren't any. Or you think like, oh wow, I'm really stupid because I misspoke in a conversation. Okay, is there any evidence to support that? No. You're a competent individual in your job and you just misspoke. Like it's not a big deal, but we take small things to heart because we
Yeah.
want to be perfect. And that's the other part that people have to get over in the beginning stages of this is perfectionism. It's the downfall of so many people. And one, perfection is, subjective, but two, it's literally impossible from a scientific standpoint, impossible. So once you accept that and realize you cannot ever achieve it, no one can, that's a huge, huge empowering idea that you don't have to be because nobody can. And from there, it's just
Mhm.
looking at, okay, well, what is the best version of myself and what does that look like? And that's really what I feel like our purpose is on this planet, regardless of what you believe, afterwards. I believe our goal and our purpose is to be happy, and happiness is being the best version of yourself. And it's different for everybody,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
once you've hit that, it's just going through the steps initially, even though it feels like it's not working and it's not fixing anything. And then eventually start hitting your stride. It's like anything else, you've got to practice at it.
Yeah. As you were talking about, sorry, I was like having this visual when
No.
you're talking about how we're striving for this perfection, and it's like something that doesn't exist. And I was like, this would be like if I was trying to become a unicorn, and I was just like, I wanted the
Yeah.
horn to grow out of my head, and it just wasn't growing, and I was so mad at myself for it. Like
It's
that's a
so
very similar
incredibly
thing.
true. It's so
Yeah.
incredibly true. And some people say, well, perfection just is different for everybody. I was like, no, no, no. Like literally does not exist.
Yeah.
That's so freeing once you really can embrace that idea. And it's also
Mhm.
helpful to realize that everyone around you is having the same feeling. This idea of imposter syndrome or not being enough or, them thinking they should be a certain way. Everybody has that. It's just nobody's talking about it, right? Because
Yeah.
it makes them look vulnerable and people hate vulnerability. But spoiler alert, vulnerability is what gets you through this process of understanding yourself and
Mhm.
learning from yourself.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I actually I've been because I personally have been working on not being I didn't realize it, but I definitely have perfectionistic tendencies. And I this past like 2 weeks, I was like, I am going to do 5 things intentionally shitty and just like
Yeah.
see what happens. And I'm like, I'm surviving, like I didn't empty the trash can in the bathroom and like the world hasn't gone to hell. Like it's totally fine. So that's been like actually something fun that I've been trying to do to prove like this is silly. And then I just
Yeah.
laugh about it because I'm like, this is actually really ridiculous.
Well, that's one of the things
But
super easy way to check yourself and put things in perspective is one, and this may sound ridiculous, but it's true. Did anybody die? There is a reason I'm not a heart surgeon or brain surgeon or a pilot. Okay. Like those people we can talk to about something else. But even for them, generally speaking, did anybody die? And the answer is no. Okay. We've crossed the major threshold. Second is what can we do about it? If you can do something about it, okay, great. If
mm,
you can't, learn from it. I think it's like the Dalai Lama that said,
mm,
in essence, if you can do something about something, there's no need to worry. And if you can't do anything about it, there's no need to worry because you can't change it. So
oh my
it's
gosh.
it's really the idea that you've got to let go of. having control and thinking that perfectionism is who you are, and your value is determined
Mm.
by being perfect. And that's one of the hardest things I think for people to let go of, and especially professionals,
Oh, yeah.
especially lawyers, is they tie their value to what they do or what they earn, or being even the best mom that does the Pinterest cupcakes. Like, that's what they tie their value to. And it's just absolutely absurd. And I'm not saying it's absurd for people to feel that way, because it's understandable, but it's absurd to keep living your life and not doing anything about it to change that.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I think that we all have these same thoughts in our floating through our mind on varying capacities and levels, right? And it's almost like if everyone just admitted it, then no one would have to worry about these things anymore,
And as a prime example, I
which
mean,
is interesting.
yeah, people say, it's really hard to go out there and be vulnerable. Hell yeah, it's hard to go out there and be vulnerable. Trust me. Otherwise, everybody'd be doing it if it was, if it was
Yeah.
easy. But I'll a prime example. I wrote this book. I wanted to put this message out here about what happened to me. But then after I wrote it, and then I realized, turns out that was actually being published and it was going to be out there for people to read. And I was going to be talking to people about it. It scared the hell out of me.
Mm.
Um, I've been open with people in my life about what I dealt with and what I went through and the anxiety and the depression. But to put it
Mhm.
on that type of platform and to really be super open about it with people in my profession was terrifying. Um, but it really gives people permission to be themselves with you when you're authentic with them. And that's what happened in a lot of events or networking events. People would come up to me after I'd spoken, or if I got speaking to them and told them what I was doing and what the topic was about, they say, "Oh my God, I'm so glad you said that. I felt X, Y, and Z, or I've dealt with anxiety and depression. I've had a really hard time." Those people never in a million years would have told me that unless I had told them
Mhm.
first. And just like you said,
Yeah,
we're
you're
all
giving
dealing
them
with
that
it.
invitation.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so it just takes one person. I'm not saying you have to go out and write a book and tell everybody all your personal feelings and thoughts to do this, but I survived. I didn't
Mhm.
lose a job. People have never come up to me and ever said, "Wow, you're less of a person," or "You're not a real attorney," or "You're not professional," blah blah blah. Nobody has ever said that to me. And quite frankly, even if they did, I'd write it off. But
Mhm.
you're not less of a human being for owning how you feel and who you are. And if anybody tells you or seems to suggest that, that is patently false. And it's that you have to realize it's that person dealing with their own issues at that point.
Oh yeah, totally. And I think that when you're authentic, I don't whether people recognize it or not, if someone's being like truly who they are and sharing from like a truthful place, it draws people to you naturally because I think we all can tell subconsciously or not whether people are being truthful. And it feels good to be around someone who's like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
Hello, and for the good and the bad, this is me, right? And that's a really beautiful thing. And I'm thinking, you were talking a little bit ago about knowing who you are. And do you have any kind of guidance on helping people step more into that or going through that self discovery process of like really understanding who they are, what they want?
Yeah, I do. So, first of all, anything Brene Brown has written, she's just an amazing author. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
Mhm. Oh,
Pick
yeah.
up anything of her books and you'd be fine. But as a very basic stepping point, place to start, get a list of values. And I mean, there's tons of lists out there on the internet, and go through and just circle the ones that resonate with you, and drill it down and come up with about 3 to 5 of those values. And that's where you start. That's where you start aligning your life with those things. Because we all want to
Mhm.
say, it's not like anybody is like, "Yeah, I don't value honesty," right? But maybe that's not your major thing. Maybe it's love. Maybe it's caring. Maybe it's worship. It could be any number of things, but really drilling down to what makes you tick, and getting in tune with that, and realizing that this is really what you want to form your life around, and you don't want to compromise on those things. And that's what it is. At the end of the day, if you had to choose 3 things in your life that you absolutely could not compromise on, what would they be? And then you can start
Mhm.
making decisions in your life based around those things. If they further it, great. If they don't do it. And that may mean
Mhm.
cutting out relationships in your life or switching jobs or not hanging out with certain people. Um, and of course, there's going to be things you have to do in your life that you don't enjoy. I'm not saying it's going to be rainbows and kittens all the time, but you can set boundaries and avoid things that you are not absolutely obligated to do. And that includes family. So, anybody who needs permission to set boundaries with family, you absolutely have 1,000% permission to do that. And you can do it in a
Mhm.
healthy way that says, I love you, if that's the case. I love you, but here's where I'm setting this boundary because for my own health and well being, I can't have X conversations with you. I can't be around you because of Y, addiction or toxicity. Um, and that is
Mhm.
completely okay. I can't stand, I know why, but I can't stand when I hear people say, well, they're family. All right. I mean,
Mhm.
that doesn't mean anything though. It doesn't mean that they have 1,000% permission to walk all over you or be toxic and take away from you as an individual and what makes you happy. That's not a free pass.
Yeah, and I think that when I hear you talk, and I totally understand what you're talking about, is I think of people experience a lot of guilt around that, or like some sort of shame of like, I can't like abandon this person, or I can't not give them exactly what they're asking for, and then because then they'll feel guilty or shameful. So I guess in those instances, and I don't know if you know have like any ideas on how to help people work through that a little bit, or maybe like prompts that you can tell yourself or things like that.
Yeah, so I have an aunt who is an addict. She doesn't acknowledge that she's an addict, but she is.
Mm,
Um, and it's really hard because I love her tremendously and she's a great person. Um, but I have been there for her when she's needed me. And once I realized that need, what prompted her to need me was a result of the addiction. I was there for that one
mm,
time, and now I'm not going to be there in that capacity again. And you can tell somebody I love you, and this is very specific to an addiction type thing, but I'm not going to further your addiction by showing up every time you call me, by enabling you
mm,
in any other way. If you want to have a relationship, which I want to have with you, it just needs to be on these terms. So it doesn't necessarily mean cutting somebody out entirely, but it does mean setting your boundary and letting the other
mm.
person make a decision as an adult whether they're going to respect that or not. Um,
Yeah.
you can be around a family, say a mom that's really toxic and judgmental and just never has anything nice to say. You can absolutely tell them, I love you. I want to be around you. And that's always helpful too, using I, when you're explaining your
Mm,
feelings to somebody else. So it's not, doesn't feel like it's an attack on the other person.
mm,
I love you. I want to be around you. For me to be able to do that, these things have to change or have to be a certain way. This is what's healthy for me. And if the other person says, well, I don't get that, you're just being selfish, be like, this is what I need. And I want to be a part of your life, but this is what's healthy for me right now. And at the end of the day,
mm.
if somebody respects you and cares about you, they may not right at that moment, but hopefully they'll come back to the table and say, okay, I want to be part of your life. Let's work something out. And it takes time and it may never happen, but you can't live your life kowtowing to somebody else or being beholden to
Mhm.
someone because they're manipulating you and feeling guilty. And I'm not saying feeling guilty is not a valid feeling, but what I am saying is that you can't allow that to be how you feel for the rest of your life because of someone else's actions or inactions.
Yeah, totally. Oh, that's awesome. I yeah, and I think that that's something that a lot of people probably do struggle with is, family relationships interactions are sensitive, and most of the times I think they're the hardest because you love them the most. So it's a challenging thing, but that's really helpful guidance, especially having some of those the coming from a place of I and talking more about like I feel this way when this happens instead of being like you do this and it makes me, you know.
Yeah, well,
So
and
that's
even
good.
some people,
Good
my
to hear.
best
Yeah.
friend told me this. She's like, I hate that. I don't like beat around the bush. I was like, anybody who knows me knows I don't beat around the bush. And she's like, I know you don't. I said, but look, think about it. Think about it. If I come to you and say, you are a horrible person because you do X, Y, and Z, as opposed to, I feel incomplete or, upset when, we have these conversations. Like, it's just, it may be a semantics game to certain people, but it makes such a big difference.
Mhm.
And if you genuinely are wanting to improve the relationship or set boundaries, you'll modify your language, because people just
Mhm.
automatically are going to get defensive. And they're going to get defensive anyway. They're going to get more defensive and shut down more if you don't approach it in the best way possible, which is using the
Mhm.
pronouns, personal pronouns.
Yeah, yeah. I know language is a powerful tool if you can really learn how to use it to your advantage in an interaction. I was going to ask you, I know you kind of have some insight on self-care, and especially, coming from a place of anxiety, depression, probably working through some burnout in your career, at that really peak moments. What do you often tell people in terms of how to really care for yourself when you're going through these big life transitions and shifts and awarenesses and discoveries?
Um, be forgiving of yourself. Give yourself grace, first of all, because it's a lot. It is a lot to process, and it's a roller coaster of emotions. But also take time for yourself. Take time to sit with your thoughts, but not in a way of necessarily always working on yourself, but just to decompress. Turn
Mhm.
off the TV, turn off your cell phone, the emails, all that stuff, and just be, just exist, right? Um, you've got to unplug from life and your brain sometimes and self improvement. As much as it's a process and you want to keep doing it, you also have to take a break from it. So, one thing I know, I have the luxury of owning my own business, so I can step away from things and shift my days around. Plenty of people don't have that. I understand that. So, something as simple as
Mhm.
going to the bathroom in the middle of the day and taking a 15-minute break, it sounds ridiculous, but we all know that there's plenty of jobs out there that would like be breathing down your neck if you sat at your desk for 15 minutes not doing anything, right? So if you have to hide
Mhm.
in the bathroom, I don't care. Go hide in the bathroom for 15 minutes. Or even at lunch, I'm guilty of eating, working through my lunch while I eat. Take 30 minutes, go
Mhm.
walk around the parking lot. Um, just do something to allow yourself to step away from the task you're doing. First of all, it's good for your, self-care. Second of all, you'll be more productive at the end of the day because our brains are just not wired to keep pushing through things. We may be able to and sit and stare at a computer screen, but ultimately we're not being productive. And you're not going to be
Yeah.
productive as a human being if you don't take the time to take a break.
Yeah. And I guess a part of that too, is in terms of creating balance in your life. And I know especially I would love to ask you because you do so many different things, and you're kind of have a lot of things happening in your career and in your life. So how do you balance yourself within all of that? Is it like a seasonal thing? Like right now you're focused only on writing, right now law, coaching. Like how do you typically kind of navigate that?
Yeah, it's difficult, I'm not gonna lie. But first you have to let go of the idea of doing whatever. Say, you're doing two things, doing it 50-50 every day. It's just not gonna happen. That's just not realistic.
Hmm.
We have so many roles in our lives, business and personally. So just working towards trying to have some semblance of a balance is the goal. And you do that by allocating some of your time. If you say, okay, I'm going to work so many hours on my personal business and so many hours on my law firm, that's what I try to do. I have a start time and a stop time. And it's flexible insofar as what I feel that I need to do that day, but I still am going to cut it off at some point is what you have to do. Because the reality
Hmm.
is I don't care what you do and what businesses you have or don't have, not everything is going to get done every day. It's just not. You're not going to get everything done with your kids and your family that you need to that day or that you want to. You're not going to get everything done for work every day. But you can have a sense of accomplishment with everything that you're doing as long as you have realistic expectations. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we have to shift is we all want to be perfect. We all want to accomplish everything right now. So it's a
Hmm.
big shift in perspective and ideology to realize, okay, I have a best that I can do each day. And that may be different from day to day, but I'm able to work this much time on this part of my life, this much time on my family, this much time on my work. And that's what you strive for. And for myself, as an example, I came up here to this cabin a couple of weeks ago with some friends. I didn't do any work over the long weekend. And even though I had every intention of coming up here and doing some work, because that's what you do on vacation, I just allowed that to happen. Because right then, especially with COVID and everything that's been going on, spending time with my girlfriends and those relationships meant more to me. And I needed that in my life, because I just haven't been able to do that as often, obviously, because of everything that's been going on. But now I'm up here with my husband, and he's relaxing, and I'm able to do things like this. And then I'm going to do a little more work on my personal business. I'm not doing any legal work this weekend. So it's just giving yourself grace, but also if you need to set a balance and say, I'm going to do 30% of my time to this, 30% to this, and 30% to this, and 10% for me, do that if that's what you need to set those boundaries. But again, it's you have to kind of stick to it, and you're the only one that's going to do it at the end of the day.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that that's really helpful because it really seems like, especially in the past few years, I mean, I think the days of people having one job title are kind of coming to an end. So many people, it's like half of America has some kind of a side hustle, whether you're just like randomly driving Uber or starting an online business or whatever have you. And so, really refining that balance is so key. And when it comes to setting expectations, do you have a way that you do that? Or like, is it just trial and error of understanding, okay, this is because I'm like, oh, I can get this done in an hour. Like 4 hours later, I'm still
Yeah.
working on it. So, how do you establish those expectations?
Yeah, it's tough. It's really tough, and it's tough if we're talking about expectations for clients or customers, or employers or ourselves too. So
Mhm.
um, I find for my business, for the law firm side of it, is blocking out time for general tasks. So, like, I'll have calls from 2 to 5 in the afternoon. And the reason is that works better for me mentally. I don't want to start my day with clients or opposing counsel. Like, I just don't want to. Um, and then in the morning, I'll do admin. I'll go through my email to catch up. I'll, get everything because my email always fills up, go through it. And then during the middle of the day is my more substantive work that I need to get done. So time blocking is really beneficial. You can do that personally and professionally. So you're setting your own expectations for the day and giving yourself a visual cutoff. And I even add it to my calendar. So like I'll do like a calendar that people can't see. It's like admin. And it's like calls and substantive work and emails. So it's a nice visual reminder for myself. And also let people know if you have people in your office, colleagues, or even your family, this is what I'm going to be doing from this time to this time. I cannot be interrupted. Or if you have questions for me, this was something that happened a lot when I had a paralegal working for me in an office. She would always want to stop by and talk to me. I couldn't get anything done. I kept getting interrupted. So I had to say, okay, unless this is something that has to go out right now, I need you to hold your questions till the end of the day. And what would happen, and most people find this, is 9 times out of 10, they get resolved before they even got to the end of the day. Or at the end of the day, then you can just knock them all out right there and then, and you're done. But you've been able to be efficient with your time.
Yeah.
That's really, really how I do it. And even with clients, I tell, first of all, I don't respond to texts after a certain time. I don't respond on the weekends. And that's with both businesses. I can't, and I don't
Mhm.
send them either. That's the key. You can't send texts or stuff after not after the call hours, and then be wonder why they're trying to get in touch with you after those times. So you have to stop yourself from doing that. Emails are different, but stop yourself from interacting
Mhm.
after a certain point. But now my
Mhm.
clients know they don't have an expectation of me responding immediately. I mean, even for general updates, I tell them, okay, you'll get an update every 3 to 4 weeks. That's what I can do, and that's what's realistic and normal for my business. So you can't make a rule and then play hide the ball with the people around you and wonder why they're frustrated and they don't understand. You have to
Yeah.
communicate,
Yeah.
and then it makes things go a lot easier. And most people are on board for it. It's just they've never been told that. And like you said, in this day and age, I think we're so busy and we have all these expectations of other people that are unrealistic, first of all, but that we don't verbalize. And there's nothing wrong with reining in those expectations or reforming them or framing them for other people.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that we're all very trainable,
Oh yeah, yes,
Yeah.
but you have to
Yeah.
be
And so,
consistent. You have to be
yeah,
consistent.
yeah, it's like we're little puppies, you gotta
Yeah,
like set the boundaries and stick with it. Otherwise, we'll jump up on the couch like whenever we can.
no,
Yeah.
that's so incredibly
Well,
true.
yeah. Well, Catherine, this has been really insightful, and you have so much, like, just a wealth of knowledge to share. So, thank you for coming on. And I don't know if you have anything else that you want to share or talk about. And then, where can everybody find you, get a copy of your book, work with you, or learn more about you?
Yeah, first and foremost, please, 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 just take the time to try to find the best version of yourself. It's so incredibly worth it.
Mhm.
And take courage in who you are and what you deserve in life. Don't let anybody tell you deserve anything less. Is really the biggest thing. But I can be found on my link tree is the best way to get access to everything. So it's Linktree KF as in Frank Burmeister. I'm sure you'll spell that out. But you can get links to my social media, my websites, my latest news event. So in this case, like podcasts, particularly on there. And then also on Amazon is where you can buy my book. And I would love to give a free copy to the first person who reaches out and lets me know that it was from this podcast. That would be great. But if you buy it, please leave a
Ooh.
review. Reviews make a huge difference on Amazon. So I really hope that you guys like it and enjoy it. And if you want to work with me, you can also get in contact with me on my personal website as well.
Awesome. That is amazing. Thank you so much for being here. And we'll put all that info in the show notes as well.
Perfect. Thanks
So
for
you guys
having
reach
me.
out. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for tuning in to this week's episode of Who Wears Your Pants. Please do me a favor and hit subscribe. Leave me a review or a comment so that I can turn this disaster of a show into something great. I need you. No, seriously, I do. And if you're feeling really invigorated, check out my corner of the interwebs at kirstentrammell.com, or let's get really social on the gram at Kirsten__Trammell, because as a ginger, I need all the friends I can get. Peace and love, my homies. I will see you next time.